Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of Self-Inflicted Oral Nostalgia, a Fans Guided by Voices podcast. My name is Jeff Gomez and I'm the author of the forthcoming book Zeppelin over Dayton, Guided by Voices, album by album, which is available for pre-order on Amazon. Today I'll be looking at the band's live show. I'm going to talk about GBV's concerts, live recordings, and their history on stage. I'll also give a report of the group's most recent and will undoubtedly become the band's most infamous concert, the 2019 New Year's Eve blowout that promised and delivered a whopping 100 songs. You can also go to the website everygbvlp.com to hear podcast episodes about all 28 GBV studio records. Now let's get to the show. Okay, before I talk about the band's last concert of 2019, I want to lay the groundwork by taking a look at Guided by Voices as a live band, their history on stage, and live material that's been released, both officially and unofficially. Now, GBV is strange because they basically reversed the order in which things happen for most bands. Your typical group forms, writes some songs, rehearse, and then play some shows. The attention those shows receive then prompts someone to offer to put out a single or a record. Countless stories of bands being discovered begin with an A&R guy or someone from a label seeing a group live and then introducing themselves afterward and saying, "I want to sign you." But that's not what happened with GBV. Other than a few scattered performances at the beginning of their career, for years Bob and his rotating roster of collaborators made and released records on their own. They didn't play shows because, frankly, no one ever asked them to. If anyone had liked or even heard early records like Devil Between My Toes or Sandbox, Pollard and his crew probably would have played a show or two. They certainly could have gigged around Ohio, venturing out to Cincinnati or Cleveland on weekends or school breaks, but since the band had no following whatsoever, local or otherwise, Bob stayed in the basement and garage studios and kept writing songs and recording. It wasn't until the band signed to Scat in '93 that Bob put together a group and started playing shows, and that was only because Scat Records founder Robert Griffin cajoled Bob into doing so. The reaction was immediate. As Griffin told me, people kept coming up to him after GBV played that first show at CBGB's, telling him, "Wow, I didn't even realize they were a rock band." And that makes sense, right? If you'd only heard The Grand Hour or an advanced cassette of Vampire and Titus, which had been making the rounds at the time, what would you have been expecting to take the stage that night? Some sort of avant folk weirdo like Gary Wilson or Early Beck? Or maybe a no-wave art band fresh from the gallery scene? You certainly wouldn't have expected the second coming of The Who, which is kind of what GBV Live usually ends up sounding like. In fact, as far back as 1995, Pollard told an interviewer, "We always wanted to be the Beatles on record and The Who live." GBV started their concert career with a bang, and they've basically never changed or altered their approach. This means that, over the years, the band has amassed quite a reputation for their performances. In a review of a 2018 show in Oregon, Holly Hazelwood wrote, "Guided by Voices are one of the most bang-for-your-buck live bands on the planet. A cursory look at the number of songs played over the course of a show can spoil other bands for you, as you wonder how a bunch of 50-plus-year-old rock dudes can have the stamina to play 40-plus songs in a night, every night, when bands half their age struggle to play half as many songs in an evening." However, she also states, "A Guided by Voices show isn't for everybody, and even if it is, it's something you may find yourself needing to prepare for." I'll talk about this more in a second. Cam Lindsay, writing for the website Exclaim, in a review of a Canadian stop on the Space Gun Tour, said that, "Anyone proclaiming that rock is dead just isn't paying attention, because for nearly 3 hours it was alive and scissor-kicking, coursing through the veins of the band they repeatedly call GBV." What I love about these two reviews is that these are recent shows. Nearly 30 years after their live debut, the group is sharper and tighter than they've ever been. Eric Carr, writing about GBV's supposedly final show in 2004, broke down the various elements of the band's concerts. He wrote, "The anatomy of a GBV show is, for better or worse, almost legendary. 3 hours, about 50 songs, and nearly as many beers shared between the band and the crowd. This is not to mention leg kicks, microphone twirls, a frenzied audience, and by the end, some righteously slurred speech." That line there about "for better or worse" hints at the flaws or weakness that GBV has exhibited over the years when playing live. On Propeller, Pollard promised to throw a great party. But what do you do when that party gets out of hand? And what happens when Bob's the guy who caused it to get out of hand? According to Sean Palmerston, in a 2006 article entitled Flamboyant Careers and Alcoholism, the first time the band played in Canada, opening up for Urge Overkill, things didn't go so well. Palmerston writes, "A beer-fueled Pollard scuffles with and is manhandled by club security after he attempts to have the band play an encore on the audience's request. Security drags him from the club. There is no encore." The next 2 decades would be filled with similar incidents, Bob or the band being either too drunk to finish shows or even perform anything that could be called a show. They were really more of a display. What these were displays of, however, depends on your point of view. Hubris? Awesomeness? Idiocy? Was it all a good time, or was it just drunks being sloppy? Or, like the Replacements, was it both? The cover of the Benefit for the Winos bootleg is a review by Dave Larson, which features the headline, "GBV Throws This One Away." Larson wrote that Guided by Voices on a good night is one of the best live bands you'll ever see. Except, on the night that he's reviewing them, the band's performance is, as he says, sloppy and sad. Depending on where you stand on public drunkenness or wasting $40 to see a band you really love, you either think these exhibitions are delightful or a drag. Personally, I don't like to see anyone stumbling around drunk, on stage or anywhere else. But a whole bunch of fans get into it. For example, Orlando, for some reason, has always seemed to be the site of especially raucous GBV shows. The audience got into the habit of throwing so much beer around that Bob once had to take the stage in a poncho and goggles. A writer who attended one of those out-of-control concerts noted, "I ended up wearing as much as I drank." This behavior by both the band and the audience has not been entirely left in the 90s. A 2014 show at New Jersey's Stone Pony Club, which was being live-streamed on Yahoo, descended into a drunken mess. Bob went on frequent incoherent rants and actually fell down at one point. Is that cool? Is that rock and roll? Again, that's for you to decide. I'll just say that, as a concert goer, the fact that people treat GBV shows as a night of rock and roll fantasy camp can sometimes be a drag. Like at a San Francisco gig a few years ago, while we were all waiting for the concert to start, a young woman turned to me and asked, "Have you seen them before?" Trying not to appear too old or grizzled or like that guy from the LCD Sound System song, I said, "Oh yeah." She then asked, "What should I expect?" It should be noted that we were super close to the stage. I replied, "Well, it's going to be really loud and people are going to sing along a bunch. And then, halfway through the set, a really drunk guy is going to come crashing into the pit. He's going to lean all over everyone before finally falling down and being dragged out by a friend of his who will also be pretty drunk." She gave me a really funny look as if I knew who the guy was who was going to be doing the falling down. And yet, of course, the drunk guy always changes. Every town has one, or two. Who knows? Maybe next time it'll be you. And I get that. It's GBV, and if I don't want that, I should just stand in the back, out of the way. And sometimes that's just what I do. No harm, no foul, no mosh pit. Like there was a dust-up online after a recent Detroit show where I guess one guy got mad at another guy for talking between songs. My response to that is to paraphrase a line from Apocalypse Now. Getting angry at someone for bad behavior at a Guided by Voices show is like handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. On the flip side, I've seen more camaraderie and brotherly love at GBV shows than I've seen anywhere. I've witnessed strangers turn into friends after a few beers and a couple of rowdy sing-alongs. I've had guys put their arm over my shoulder, people I didn't know, as we all shouted out "Tractor Rape Chain" at the top of our lungs. GBV brings people together. Yes, there might be a lot of Miller Lite in the room, but there's just as much, if not more, love. As I mentioned a minute ago, a few things are hallmarks at GBV shows: volume, duration, and rowdy fans. Another thing you can expect is banter from Bob. But this is more than just talking in between songs. Pollard, especially as the night goes on and he's had a few beers, loves to crack jokes and crack on other bands. As he told the London crowd last summer, "I loved his shit talk." That probably comes out of his sports past. Talking trash is just part of the game. Most of the time, what he says is pretty funny. Bob's even put out 2 LPs, which he called comedy records, that consist of nothing but stage banter edited together from different shows. They were issued on his own Yuck Yuck Motherfucker Records, which I believe is Rockathon's classical music imprint. The first one, Relaxation of the Asshole, is out of print and pricey if you want to get a copy, but the sequel, Meet the King Asshole 2, can be had for only $18 from Rockathon. Here's a sample from the first record.
Hey kids, as we were singing in Brides of Big Glass, a thought came to my head. I was wondering, and I don't claim to be a fucking sex symbol, because, you know, for God forbid, I'm 44 fucking years old. I have a small dick anyway from the get-go. So don't get me wrong. But I want to know, how in the fuck the guy from the Counting Crows gets to fuck all the people from Friends? How in the fuck does he do it? He's an ugly motherfucker. He's fatter than me. What the fuck's he got? Money. Money. I got money. I got some fucking money.
As you can tell, these comments are usually a reliable source of fun at a GBV show, unless of course Bob's too wasted and it's mostly just slurring. The New Year's Eve show is actually light on trash talk. Bob said he liked Jay Mascis, doesn't like Lou Barlow, and that was about it. As with most bands who are amazing live, efforts to capture DBV's onstage magic in a recording have only been sporadically successful. There have been a few decent bootlegs. For All Good Kids and Jellyfish Reflector come to mind. The official live record from a few years ago, Ogre's Trumpet, which is what's playing in the background here, is a pretty good document capturing the sound of the current band, though I find Bob's vocals to be a bit muffled throughout. The recording of the band's Austin City Limits performance from November 2004 starts out okay, but descends into a drunken mess that's not too fun to hear. This was just a month before the end of the band, and everyone seems pretty tired of each other. As they get more and more drunk, it's like they're drinking to forget rather than celebrate. My favorite live GBV record is Live in Dayton. It contains 43 songs spanning 3 sides of vinyl and adding up to more than 2 hours of rock-solid GBV. It was professionally recorded in Dayton in 2001 as part of a birthday party for Anyway Records founder and Columbus mainstay, Bella Crumpetcher. Anyway had put out some of the earliest GBV singles, and Bella and Bob were close friends in the 90s and beyond. And while the band is clearly drinking during the show, they're also in their prime. It's an awesome set spanning early tracks and stuff from side projects, including one of my favorites, the first Airport 5 record. It's a really great listen, so find it online or track down a copy. As we start to talk about the New Year's Eve show, let me say that this was fun for me because it felt really personal. I'm from Southern California, and I lived in Los Angeles for a number of years in the early to mid-90s. While there, I saw lots of great shows, large and small, at venues like the Roxy, Jabberjaw, the Palace, the Palladium, and others. And even though I bought my first GBV record while living in another state, the CD of Vampire and Titus, I purchased their best record, B1000, at the Tower Records on the Sunset the Saturday after it came out. I first saw the band live a year or so later at Spaceland on the Alien Lanes tour. And not that GBV were playing places like the Forum or anything, but they usually played at bigger places than that. The night before, they'd played the Troubadour, which holds 500 people. Spaceland holds only half as much, though a whole bunch more than that showed up. Nate Farley later remembered the concert as a shit show, which it was. The crowd went absolutely crazy, and Jim Greer's bass cabinet caught fire. The next day, he had to borrow an amp from No Doubt for a show in San Diego. That was nearly a quarter of a century ago. Now GBV's back and coming off a banner year which has seen the release of 3 really great records. The lineup for the New Year's Eve show, same as the past couple of years, has remained steady. Pollard, of course, on vocals, with Doug Gillard on lead guitar stage right, if you're looking at the stage, Mark Shue on bass stage left, joined by Bobby Bear Jr. on rhythm guitar at the far left. At the back is Kevin March on the drums. This is Pollard's preferred lineup, a twin guitar attack along with bass and drums, leaving him free to do nothing but sing. For as much as Pollard is compared to, or compares himself to, The Who, or the Beatles, the British invasion band he's created his band in the image of is the Rolling Stones. I now want to talk really quickly about the gear the guys are using. Doug Gillard plays a 1976 Les Paul he got when he was 19 for under $500 from a guy in Akron. On Dave Hill's podcast from last September, Doug talked about his inspiration for getting it. Even though everyone in his scene at the time was playing Fenders, Gillard wanted a Gibson to emulate his heroes Mark Bolan and Mick Ronson. He's used it on all of GBV's tours. The guitar has DiMarzio pickups instead of the more traditional humbuckers. The only thing Gillard's ever done to the guitar is occasionally replace the neck pickup due to wear and tear and, of course, strings. The guitar is in standard tuning, and it's usually the only one he uses for the entire show. For the New Year's Eve show, he used the guitar almost exclusively, swapping it out briefly for a Sunburst Les Paul. Something to mention about a Les Paul is how heavy they are. Weighing in at around 10 pounds, the heft of a Les Paul has long been the bane of many a gigging guitar player. In fact, Bobby Bear Jr. used to play Les Pauls, but he found them to be too heavy. As far as amps go, Gillard's playing through a Mesa Boogie amp head with a Marshall 4x12 cabinet, which he says works well for touring because it's lightweight. Gillard has an array of pedals, the majority of which are made by Akron, Ohio-based Earthquaker Devices, a company founded by former Black Keys tour manager Jamie Stillman. Bobby Bare Jr.'s main guitar is a 64 Gibson SG, the model Angus Young from AC/DC made famous. Bobby bought it at Nashville's legendary Gruen Guitars for only $900. He got it so cheap because it was missing a few things. On the body, right below the bridge, is a large sticker of a butterfly. Bare bought the sticker in a Chicago novelty and toy store called Uncle Fun. The store, now closed, was right across from Shuba's Tavern, a club and restaurant that Bare Jr.'s played at least 3 times as a solo artist as far back as 2010. As a backup, Bare Jr. has another Gibson, a 1973 SG. That model came standard with 3 humbuckers, but Bobby removed the middle one since that's where he, as he says, digs in when he plays. A cool thing about that guitar is that it features an original collage by Bob. Pollard made the collage after Bare Jr. sent to Bob an outline of the guitar's shape. When Bare Jr. received Pollard's collage, he had it laminated and then, in true punk rock fashion, simply taped it to the Gibson. Bare Jr. plays through a transatlantic amp head, which he likes because it sounds like a dual rectifier, which he associates with his favorite era of the band, which is the late 90s, early 2000s. Bobby barely has any pedals, preferring to just stick with one sound all night. Mark Shu's number 1 guitar is a white Fender American Special P bass. He likes it because the newer basses are light, as opposed to what he calls the boat anchor basses of the 70s, which take their toll during a long show. Speaking of, Mark plays so hard and the shows are so long that he goes through a set of strings a night. Amp-wise, he has a standard Ampeg VST. He has a couple of pedals, including a bass overdrive for tunes that require, as he says, a little more hair. And finally, Kevin March, for the New Year's Eve show, was playing a 5-piece Ludwig set painted with green glitter. The New Year's Eve show was announced back in April as the ultimate year-end blowout. And whereas normal or past GBV shows consist of anywhere from 40 to 50 songs, this one was going to feature 100. Why? Well, as Pollard put it on the band's Facebook page, my doctor dreamt that we played 100 songs for $100 and even wrote it as a prescription for me on his prescription pad, doctor's orders. Proving his point, the poster for the show is a set list from the night written on a prescription pad from Pollard's doctor, James Seiler. Seiler has been practicing for 34 years and has an office on Main Street in Dayton. And while that's a great story, I must admit that I find it hard to believe that any sane MD would order a 62-year-old man to pound beers, drink tequila, and sing for 4 hours. But whatever the genesis of the idea, as soon as the show was announced, people promptly freaked out, thinking it was going to end up being one of the ones for the record books. Which, now that it's done, I guess it was. It's certainly the longest Guided by Voices concert ever, though not by as much as you'd think. Previous longest GBV show was the final concert of the Electrifying Conclusion Tour, which was also a New Year's Eve show. During that gig, from the last day of 2004, the band played 63 songs lasting a formidable 4 hours. Well, this time they played a whopping 100 songs, although it actually wasn't much longer, clocking in at about 4.5 hours. The reason they packed so much music into a relatively or comparatively short amount of time is because there wasn't a lot of banter or shenanigans, they just played. This was welcome news, since I was really worried the show was going to take something like 5 or 6 hours, and that it was going to turn into something resembling a telethon or a death march. But that's not how it was at all. The night actually flew by, the show feeling more like a movie that's long but also totally entertaining. If I looked at my watch, it was only to see how close we were to midnight. In fact, the concert never really felt long. The amazing songs just kept coming and people kept singing. It was a blast. Now, even at a relatively paltry 4.5 hours, that still makes it longer than a few other shows which are cited as being the longest by a single artist. Pollard's nemesis Bruce Springsteen, a repeated target of Bob's trash talking, often plays long shows. He has more than once pushed a performance past the 4-hour mark. The Cure played a 4-hour show in Mexico 4 years ago, and the Grateful Dead once played a 5-hour show back in 1973. Of course, one of the things that helps the Dead, and to a lesser extent Springsteen, play long shows is that they have long songs. The Dead show I just mentioned featured a 31-minute rendition of The Other One. That's nothing. The following year they would perform a 46-minute version of Playing in the Band. Bob and the boys don't really do that. They basically play an entire LP's worth of material in the time it takes the Dead to do one song. I must also say that, in terms of promising to play 100 tracks, Pollard and the band could have taken the easy way out by performing a whole lot of Cash Rivers tunes, most of which clock in at around 30 seconds. But they didn't do that at all. They played real songs. True, Bob did mention that they put Lethargy back into the set because it was easy to play. But then they followed this up with Sweating the Plagues the Very Second, which, as Bob pointed out, has more than one chord. It should also be noticed that lots of people, myself included, made the pilgrimage to LA just to see the show. There were various meetups for fans the night of the concert, and even the day before. I met up with a group at the Mayfair Hotel just down the street from the Telegram, and it was really great to swap stories and experiences with other GBV fans. I'd never been to the Telegram before, but it's a really nice venue. The sound was good and there were bars inside and outside the main room. Without a doubt, the crowd was amped for the show, and yet the floor never seemed crowded, and from what I could see of the pit, things never got out of hand. There was at least one crowd surfer and a woman wearing a sequined dress stage dive during the last song, Glad Girls, which was pretty much perfect. The band took the stage at 8:15. The fact that they started so early helped ensure that the night didn't turn into a marathon lasting into the early morning hours. Doug and Mark were dressed for the occasion, with Gillard sporting a white tuxedo jacket and untied bow tie, while Shu had on a smart blazer and a white top hat. The rest of the guys were dressed in their standard gig attire. The stage was pretty bare. There was no backdrop, and even the neon "Club is Open" sign that sometimes shows up at gigs was absent. Kevin March's bass drum was also bare, save for a new GBV 2020 bumper sticker, which was being sold that night as merch. The band performed under a series of red lights that looked like lit cigarettes, while the stage itself was bathed in blue light. The sound was great, with the drums being really heavy and Bob's vocal pretty clear. Producer and engineer Travis Harrison, who also travels with the band handling their live sound, also added some really nice touches throughout the night, including providing echo to parts of Bob's vocals on certain tracks, such as Hot Freaks. If I had one complaint, it was that Doug's guitar was a bit quiet. When he took the night's few solos, they were hard to hear over the rest of the band. One of the things I wondered about before the show was how the group was going to keep track of the 100 songs. I thought maybe there'd be some sort of countdown board on the stage, or that someone from the road crew would walk back and forth like a round card girl. But the band didn't do anything like that, and frankly I'm glad, since those are pretty bad ideas. Doing something like that would have turned the show into some sort of novelty. This wasn't at all any kind of stunt or endurance test on the band's part or ours. Pollard's got nothing to prove at this point in his career. Instead, the show was just a really fun evening packed with a whole lot of amazing songs. In terms of Bob's performance, owing to the evening's length, it would have been hard for it to not be a bit subdued and static. Over the course of more than a 4-hour show, he only twirled the microphone a handful of times. His other theatrics, such as the high kicks and the Karate Kid / Jethro Tull pose, were also in short supply. He even, for the first time I've seen the band perform, sat down throughout the evening on a chair positioned in front of the drums. However, I'm not faulting any of this. I was astounded that Bob and the rest of the guys were on stage for over 4 hours. Pollard even made mention of this, saying that the night was the longest show he'd ever played. He then added, "Forgive me for sitting down," which everyone in the crowd most assuredly did. I myself had planned to retreat at least once to a bar stool in order to take a break, and yet, once the show got rolling and the great tunes kept coming, I was loath to even retreat to the bathroom for fear of missing anything. When I finally went to the restroom and then to get another cocktail as Jam War Song kicked in, I promptly kicked myself, since this meant missing Littlest League Possible and Cohesive Scoops, two favorites. That being said, I heard one in the bathroom and the other from the bar. But I made it back to the front in time for an amazing rendition of the Propeller track, Lethargy, a song I haven't heard the band play for almost a decade. Speaking of, the set was filled with surprises, deep cuts going all the way back to 1986 in the band's first release, Forever Since Breakfast, the band pulling out She Wants to Know. Other songs that I was amazed and very pleased to hear were Matter Eater Lad from 1994's EP Clown Prince of the Menthol Trailer. From that same year, they pulled out Hey Aardvark from the Static Airplane Jive 7-inch. A few other great deep cuts were the Hold on Hope B-side Tropical Robots, and the solo tunes Town of Mirrors from Kid Marine and Whiskey Ships from Waved Out. The whole set list was pretty much perfectly chosen and sequenced. The older songs, the one Pollard announced were woven into our hearts, sat perfectly beside the newer material. And even if the band had played all 68 tracks from the 3 records that came out in 2019, that'd still leave 32 tunes, almost a whole concert's worth. The night was indeed dominated by newer material. The band played, by my count, 11 tracks from both Zeppelin Over China and Warp and Woof. 10 tracks out of the album's dozen were performed off of the recently released Sweating the Plague. The fact that the evening held so many songs meant the group could go really deep on some fan favorites. They played a whopping 10 songs, count them, 10 from B-1000. You have to go all the way back to 1994 when the group was touring to support the record to hear that many songs off of that album. I mean, 10 songs, that's half the record. The abundance of B-1000 tracks was also really special to me since, as I mentioned before, that record came out when I was living in Los Angeles. I spent countless hours listening to it just a few miles from the Telegram, when I lived in a small little bungalow apartment down the street from Paramount Studios. I can still see myself, a 24-year-old with lots of hair and an entire future in front of him, sitting cross-legged in front of the speakers, trying to decipher the song's meanings. And even though my life has not at all turned out the way I thought or hoped it would, hearing tracks like Peephole, Yours to Keep, and Demons Are Real connected me, standing there in that room, to the person I was so long ago. And for that brief period, it was all okay. GBV also played 9 songs from the follow-up, Alien Lanes. Bob talked about how B-1000's considered the group's masterpiece, but that they followed it up with what he at least considers another masterpiece. However, Pollard also brought up Kim Deal's criticism of the LP, reminding the crowd that she called it frenetic when it first came out. Bob then added, she was probably right, which I, as one of the few people who actually don't like Alien Lanes, found really interesting. That being said, I'm sure Pollard considers the LP a frenetic masterpiece. GBV also played songs from their second Matador era, a few from the reunion records, as well as a bunch from what Pollard called the Vanity albums, meaning the records the group put out themselves before signing to Scat in 1993. Looking back, I have absolutely no regrets about the set list except that they didn't play Over the Neptune Meshgir Fox, which is my all-time favorite GBV track. I'd also have died if they played Everywhere with Helicopter. Small complaints, to be sure. The tracks ended up coming so fast, one after the other, and sometimes blending right into each other, that at around 11 o'clock, Bob remarked that the concert was almost done and that they were zooming through this shit. By the time the New Year's Eve countdown finally approached, the band was only about a dozen songs shy of 100. I was pretty blown away by this since, when I first envisioned the night, I figured I'd be stumbling back to my hotel room at dawn. Instead, after the crowd counted down the final seconds of 2019 and took a quick break to swig and pass around champagne instead of the usual beer and tequila, the show only lasted another 20 minutes. You could tell the end was coming because Pollard began to give away all the Miller Lite in the onstage cooler, as well as passing out what was left of the champagne. The fact that there was so much liquor left at the end of the night is one of the reasons the band put in pretty much a flawless performance. There was only one noticeable mistake a bit more than halfway through, when Pollard announced the Mag Earwig track Little Lines. They got a few verses in before Bob noticed that someone was playing the wrong song. They stopped, started again, and nailed it. That was really the only hiccup all night. And needless to say, the final 4 songs of Game of Pricks, I Am a Scientist, Don't Stop Now, and Glad Girls made it pretty much the perfect ending to a pretty much perfect evening. It was, hands down, the best GBV show I've ever seen. It also ranks in my top 5 shows ever. The lineup Bob has assembled is flat out his best ever. They're great musicians, but they're also fun to watch, and they really each put their hearts into the songs. They are, without a doubt, the new classic lineup. Beyond that, the catalog that Pollard's amassed over the past couple of decades surely has to rank as one of music's finest. And I don't just mean in terms of indie rock. Bob's not just sitting on a pile of tunes. He's currently at the peak of an amazing career, standing on top of a mountain of songs and albums that are arguably the best ever recorded by anyone, anywhere. Pollard and the guys have a lot to be proud of as they close out 2019 and enter 2020. Their masterful and nearly flawless New Year's Eve show proves that the band and Bob have plenty more miles in them, and I can't wait to see what comes next. Okay, that's it for the show. I'll be back with a new episode in February, looking at the band's latest album, Surrender Your Poppy Field. Until then, head to everygbvlp.com to listen to past episodes, and pre-order Zeppelin Over Dayton, Guided by Voices, album by album, wherever books are sold. Bye.